At my sister's engagement party, she laughed in front of 50 guests as she announced I was still unemployed and living like a college student at 28. Then her fiancé's boss walked in, took one look at me and said, "Hi, CEO." The room went dead silent, champagne glasses frozen halfway to lips, and my sister's perfectly glossed smile cracked like thin ice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But let me back up, because the humiliation started long before that moment. The engagement party was held at the Rosewood Country Club in Millbrook Heights, the kind of place where membership costs more than most people's annual salary. My sister Natalie had insisted on hosting it there, naturally. Everything had to be perfect for her announcement to Richmond's elite social circle. The marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, and every surface was draped in white silk and cascading orchids that probably cost more than my monthly rent. I should have known I was walking into a trap the moment I arrived. Natalie had specifically requested I wear something nice, which in her language meant, "Don't embarrass me." So I'd chosen a simple black dress from Target, nothing fancy, but clean and appropriate. Or so I thought. Toyer. The moment I walked through those towering glass doors, I felt the familiar weight of judgment. Natalie's friends, all perfectly coiffed wives of executives and socialites, gave me those polite smiles that never reached their eyes, the kind that said, "Oh, you're the disappointing sister we've heard about." Natalie herself was radiant in a cream-colored designer dress that probably cost more than I'd spent on clothes in the past 2 years. Her engagement ring caught the light like a small disco ball, and she wore it like a trophy. Her fiancé, David Ashworth, stood beside her in a custom-tailored navy suit, looking every inch the successful investment banker he was. They made the perfect couple, at least on paper. Both came from old Millbrook money, both had prestigious degrees, both moved in the same exclusive circles. David worked at Ashworth and Associates, his family's firm, and was being groomed to take over eventually. Everything about their relationship screamed, dynasty in the making. I grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and found a corner near the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the golf course. My plan was simple. Stay quiet, blend into the background, congratulate the happy couple, and leave as soon as politely possible. I'd done this dance before at family gatherings, but Natalie had other plans. "Everyone, everyone," she called out, tapping her engagement ring against her champagne flute. The crystalline sound cut through the chatter, and all 50 guests turned their attention to her. "I want to thank you all for being here to celebrate David and me." There was polite applause. She beamed, soaking it in. "You know," she continued, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she was about to say something cutting, "family is so important to us, even when they're going through challenging times." My stomach dropped. I knew that look, that sweet smile that promised pain. Take my sister Emma, for example. She gestured toward me with her champagne glass, and suddenly 50 pairs of eyes were on me. She's been really struggling lately. Still unemployed, still living in that tiny studio apartment in Riverside. You know, the area near the warehouse district? A few people made sympathetic noises. Others just stared. I felt heat creeping up my neck. "But we don't give up on family, do we?" Natalie's voice was sugar-sweet venom. "Even when they drop out of their master's program, even when they keep bouncing between those little startup jobs that never seem to work out." David looked uncomfortable but didn't intervene. His hand rested on Natalie's back, but his eyes were fixed on the floor. "The thing is," Natalie continued, clearly enjoying herself now, "some people are just meant for different paths. Emma's always been the creative type. I keep telling her she should maybe consider something more stable, maybe retail management or administrative work, something with a steady paycheck." She laughed, a tinkling sound that felt like glass breaking. "But she insists she's going to make it big in tech. It's sweet, really. We all need our dreams. The laughter that rippled through the crowd was polite but cutting. I wanted to disappear into the marble floor. I wanted to run, but my feet felt rooted in place, and my voice had completely abandoned me. "Anyway," Natalie said, raising her glass higher, "here's to family, to supporting each other through thick and thin, through success and, well, through extended periods of figuring things out." More laughter. Someone actually said, "Aw, that's sweet," in a tone that made it clear they thought it was anything but. I stood there, clutching my champagne glass so tightly I was surprised it didn't shatter, feeling like a museum exhibit labeled, "Cautionary Tale, the Family Disappointment." Every eye in the room seemed to be on me, measuring me, finding me lacking. That's when the double doors at the main entrance opened. A man in an expensive charcoal suit walked in, scanning the room with the confidence of someone who belonged everywhere he went. He was probably in his early 50s, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of presence that made people automatically step aside. I didn't recognize him, but clearly others did. A few people straightened up, suddenly more alert. David noticed him immediately. "Mr. Harrison," he said, his voice climbing an octave with nervous excitement. "I didn't know you were coming. James Harrison." Even I knew that name. CEO of Harrison Dynamics, one of the biggest tech companies on the East Coast. The kind of man whose decisions affected thousands of jobs and whose net worth had more zeros than most people could count. "David," Harrison said with a professional smile, shaking his hand, "congratulations on your engagement. I was in the area and thought I'd stop by to meet your fiancé." Natalie practically glowed. This was exactly the kind of validation she lived for, recognition from someone who mattered in Richmond's power structure. "Mr. Harrison, this is such an honor," she gushed, extending her perfectly manicured hand. "I've heard so much about Harrison Dynamics. David speaks of the company with such respect." Harrison smiled politely, but his eyes were already scanning the room. And then they stopped. On me. His expression shifted from polite social smile to something I couldn't quite read. Recognition? Surprise? He started walking toward me, and the entire room watched, confused. My heart pounded. I had no idea why James Harrison was looking at me like he knew me. We'd never met. I was sure of it. He stopped directly in front of me, and I could feel the weight of 50 confused stares. "Well," he said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, his voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been there moments before. "If it isn't the elusive Emma Castellano." I blinked, still not understanding. Then he smiled, a real smile this time, and extended his hand. "Hi, CEO. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story." The silence that followed James Harrison's words felt like it stretched for an eternity. 50 faces stared at us in complete confusion, champagne glasses suspended mid-air, conversations dying mid-sentence. Even the string quartet in the corner seemed to pause between notes. "I'm sorry," Natalie said, her voice tight with forced politeness. "I think there's been some mistake. This is my sister Emma. She's between jobs right now." Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly, and I caught something that might have been amusement flickering in his eyes. "Between jobs?" I think you might have me confused with someone else," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "We've never met, haven't we?" Harrison tilted his head, studying my face. Emma Castellano, age 28, graduated summa cum laude from Riverside University with a degree in computer science. Dropped out of your master's program at Millbrook Tech Institute after 18 months. The room seemed to hold its breath. How did he know these details about my life? "You've been working under the alias E.C. Sterling for the past 3 years, he continued, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. "Very clever, by the way. Using your initials in your grandmother's maiden name." My knees felt weak. E.C. Sterling. That was my freelance identity, the name I used for my remote consulting work. But how could he possibly know that? David stepped forward, looking confused and slightly territorial. Mr. Harrison, I think there might be some confusion here. Emma's been struggling to find steady employment. She's been doing some small freelance projects, but nothing significant. Harrison's smile widened. Small freelance projects? He let out a short laugh. David, your future sister-in-law has been one of our most valuable external consultants for the past 2 years. She's solved problems that stumped teams of our best engineers. The words hit the room like a physical force. I watched Natalie's face go through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been panic. That's impossible, she said flatly. Emma barely makes rent. She lives in a studio apartment. She can't even afford a car. Because she's been working remotely under a pseudonym, Harrison explained patiently, as if talking to a child. Many of our top consultants prefer anonymity. Less corporate politics, more focus on the actual work. He turned back to me, and his expression grew more serious. The encryption algorithm you developed for our financial services division last year, it's being implemented across our entire network. The efficiency improvements alone are saving us millions annually. I felt dizzy. The encryption project. I remembered that it had taken me 3 months of 18-hour days, working from my tiny apartment, living on coffee and determination. The client had been anonymous, just another contract through the freelancing platform I used. I'd had no idea it was for Harrison Dynamics. And the mobile app architecture you designed for our customer service platform? Harrison continued. We're rolling it out company-wide next quarter. It's going to revolutionize how we handle client interactions. More silence? I could feel every eye in the room boring into me, trying to reconcile this information with the quote, unemployed failure Natalie had just finished describing. I don't understand, I said quietly. I do freelance work, yes, but I never knew who the end clients were. The projects came through intermediary companies. Shell companies, Harrison nodded. We use them for sensitive projects. Helps us find talent without the bias that comes with the Harrison Dynamics name. Some people get intimidated, others get greedy. We prefer to evaluate pure merit. Natalie looked like she'd been slapped. This is ridiculous. If Emma was doing such important work, why didn't she tell us? Why is she living like she's broke? Because, Harrison said, his tone growing cooler as he looked at Natalie, according to our HR records, she requested that all payments be deposited into a business account under EC Sterling Consulting. Standard practice for independent contractors who are building their own companies. My head was spinning. A business account? I did have one. I'd opened it when I started freelancing seriously, mainly for tax purposes. But I'd been so focused on the work itself, so caught up in solving complex problems, that I'd barely paid attention to the financial side. I'd been living off the smaller local projects, using the business account for taxes and reinvestment. How much, David asked quietly, are we talking about here? Harris, the sound that escaped from someone in the crowd, I think it might have been Natalie, was somewhere between a gasp and a choke. But that's not why I'm here, Harrison continued, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. I'm here because we've been trying to contact EC Sterling for months about a permanent position. Our emails keep bouncing back. I felt heat creeping up my neck again. But this time it wasn't from shame. I changed my business email after some spam issues. I've been meaning to update my profiles on the freelancing platforms, but I've been busy with a new project. What kind of project? Harrison asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. I hesitated. The project I'd been working on for the past 6 months was my secret obsession, an AI-powered platform that could revolutionize small business logistics. But it was just an idea, something I'd been developing in my spare time. It's probably nothing, I said quietly. Just something I've been tinkering with. Emma, Harrison said, his voice suddenly very serious. In my experience, when brilliant minds tinker with something for months, it's usually worth paying attention to. Natalie finally found her voice. This is insane. If Emma had that kind of money, why didn't she tell us? Why is she still living like a student? I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and for the first time in years, I saw past the perfect exterior to something that looked almost like fear. Because, I said slowly, the realization dawning on me even as I spoke, I didn't want to change how people saw me. I liked being invisible. I liked being underestimated. Harrison nodded approvingly. Smart. Success makes people treat you differently. Not always better. The room was still silent, but the energy had completely shifted. Instead of looking at me with pity or condescension, people were staring with something closer to awe. Or maybe confusion. I wasn't sure which was worse. There's something else, Harrison said, reaching into his jacket pocket. I came here tonight specifically to deliver this. He pulled out an elegant envelope with the Harrison Dynamics logo embossed in gold. Emma Castellano, he said formally, Harrison Dynamics would like to offer you the position of Chief Technology Officer. Starting salary, $350,000, plus equity packages and performance bonuses. The envelope seemed to glow in the chandelier light as he extended it toward me. The board has been unanimous in this decision for months. We just needed to find you first. The envelope felt heavier than it should have in my hands. Around me, the engagement party continued to exist in this strange, suspended reality, where conversations had stopped mid-sentence, and people stood frozen like mannequins in expensive clothing. The only sound was the soft classical music from the string quartet, who seemed oblivious to the fact that the entire social order of the room had just been turned upside down. I stared at the Harrison Dynamics logo, trying to process what had just happened. Chief Technology Officer, $350,000. The numbers felt abstract, like they belonged to someone else's life. I need some air, I said quietly, more to myself than to anyone else. Harrison nodded understandingly. Of course. This is a lot to take in. He glanced around the room at the sea of stunned faces. Perhaps we could continue this conversation somewhere more private? Before anyone could respond, I was already moving toward the French doors that led to the country club's terrace. I needed space to think, space to breathe, space to figure out how my entire identity had just been rewritten in the span of 10 minutes. The terrace overlooked the 18th hole of the golf course, where the last rays of evening sun cast long shadows across perfectly manicured grass. The October air was crisp, carrying the scent of You really didn't know, did you? He said, joining me at the railing. About the money, about the impact of your work. I shook my head. I just thought I was solving puzzles. I've always been good at seeing patterns, finding solutions that others miss. The freelancing platform made it easy to stay anonymous. I liked it that way. May I ask why? I was quiet for a moment, watching a groundskeeper in the distance collect flags from the putting green. Because when people know you're capable of more, they expect more. And when you're the family disappointment, sometimes it's easier to stay disappointed than to risk failing at something that actually matters. Harrison studied my profile. Your sister seems to have some very specific ideas about who you are. A bitter laugh escaped me. Natalie has always needed to be the successful one, the pretty one, the popular one, the one with the perfect life. Having a sister who was struggling made her story more complete somehow. And you let her believe that? I've been letting her believe that for years. I turned to face him fully. Mr. Harrison, can I ask you something? How did you figure out who E.C. Sterling really was? He smiled slightly. Your coding signature. Every programmer has one. Certain ways they structure logic, comment their code, approach problems. Our security team noticed patterns in the work submitted by E.C. Sterling that matched some academic papers published by Emma Castellano during your university years. You investigated me. We investigate all our major contractors. But what really caught our attention was the progression of your work. Each project showed exponential improvement in innovation and efficiency. Whoever E.C. Sterling was, they were getting better at an almost impossible rate. I felt a strange mix of pride and vulnerability. I've been studying constantly. Every new project taught me something different. I may have dropped out of my master's program, but I never stopped learning. Why did you drop out? The question hung in the evening air. I'd never told anyone the real reason, not even Natalie. Especially not Natalie. My advisor told me my thesis project was too ambitious. He said I was trying to solve problems that were beyond my skill level, that I should focus on something more realistic. I paused, remembering the sting of that conversation. He suggested I consider switching to a less demanding program. What was your thesis project? Predictive logistics optimization using machine learning algorithms. I wanted to create a system that could help small businesses compete with major corporations by optimizing their supply chains in real time. Harrison's eyebrows rose. That's actually quite brilliant. And incredibly complex. That's what I thought. But when someone in authority tells you that your ideas are unrealistic, you start to doubt yourself. So I left the program and started freelancing instead. At least that way, if I failed, I'd only be disappointing myself. And the logistics project? I felt heat creep up my neck. I've been working on it in my spare time. It's probably naive, but I think I've actually solved most of the core problems. I've been testing it with a few local businesses in Riverside, small shops, restaurants, a couple of delivery services. How's it working? Harrison was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. Emma, would you be willing to show me this system? It's not polished enough for a presentation. It's just a working prototype. That's exactly what I want to see. Before I could respond, the French doors opened behind us. Natalie stepped onto the terrace, her perfect composure slightly cracked around the edges. She'd reapplied her lipstick, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, though her tone suggested she wasn't sorry at all. "But people are starting to ask questions, and David thinks we should probably address the situation." "What situation?" I asked. "Well, everyone's confused about this whole E.C. Sterling thing. I mean, if you've really been earning all this money, why haven't you moved out of that awful apartment? Why do you still shop at thrift stores? Why didn't you help Mom and Dad when they were struggling with the mortgage last year?" The accusation hit me like a physical blow. "What are you talking about? Mom and Dad weren't struggling. You told me they refinanced to take advantage of better interest rates." Natalie's expression flickered. Well, yes, but... "Natalie, what aren't you telling me?" She looked between Harrison and me, clearly uncomfortable with this conversation happening in front of him. "Look, can we just focus on tonight? This is my engagement party, Emma. I spent months planning this. And I've been nothing but supportive," I said, my voice rising slightly. "I came here tonight even though I knew you'd probably find some way to humiliate me, which you did in front of 50 people, until Mr. Harrison showed up and revealed that everything you said about me was wrong. I didn't know," Natalie snapped, her composure finally cracking. "How was I supposed to know you were secretly some tech genius? You never told me anything." "Because every time I tried to talk to you about my work, you changed the subject or made jokes about my computer stuff." Harrison cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps I should leave you two to talk privately." "No," I said quickly. "Actually, I think this conversation is long overdue." I turned back to Natalie. "You want to know why I didn't help Mom and Dad? Because you never told me they needed help. You want to know why I'm still living in a studio apartment? Because I've been putting every penny I could into my business account, building something that could actually make a difference. What kind of difference? Natalie's voice was sharp with frustration. The kind that helps people instead of just impressing them at country club parties. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but I couldn't take them back. And honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to. Natalie stared at me for a moment, and I saw something in her expression that I'd never seen before. Fear. Not anger, not disappointment, but actual fear. You think you're better than me now, she said quietly. Just because some CEO shows up and validates your little hobby projects, you think you're suddenly superior. No, Natalie. I think I'm tired of pretending to be less than I am just to make you feel better about yourself. The silence that followed was different from the shocked quiet inside the party. This was heavier, loaded with years of unspoken resentment and carefully maintained lies. Harrison watched this exchange with the careful attention of someone who was beginning to understand that he'd walked into something much more complex. But her eyes told a different story entirely. The tension on the terrace was thick enough to cut with a knife. When David appeared in the doorway, his face flushed and his usual composure completely shattered. Behind him, I could see clusters of guests peering through the French doors, their curiosity overriding any pretense of polite discretion. Natalie, David said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic, we need to talk. Now. Harrison raised an eyebrow. I should probably head back inside and let you handle family matters. Actually, David said, his eyes darting between Harrison and me, this concerns everyone here. Emma, I think there are some things you need to know about how information has been shared in this family. Natalie's face went pale. David, don't. Don't what? I asked, looking between them. Something cold was settling in my stomach. David ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, destroying hours of careful grooming. When Mr. Harrison was talking about your work, about E.C. Sterling, I realized something. I've been hearing about those projects for months. At the office, from my father, from other partners at the firm. What do you mean? Harrison asked, his professional interest clearly piqued. Ashworth & Associates handles legal work for several tech companies. Harrison Dynamics is one of our biggest clients. My father has been talking about this mysterious E.C. Sterling consultant for over a year. How impressed everyone was with their work, how they were solving problems that entire teams couldn't crack. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. You knew about my work? I knew about E.C. Sterling's work, David corrected. I had no idea it was you. But Natalie? He turned to look at his fiancé, who was gripping the stone balustrade so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Natalie, you knew, didn't you? I don't know what you're talking about, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. 6 months ago, David continued, his words coming faster now, like a dam breaking, when I was talking about this brilliant consultant who was revolutionizing Harrison's systems, you got very quiet. I thought you were just bored by work talk, but you asked specific questions about the name, about whether anyone knew who E.C. Sterling really was. So, Natalie's voice was defensive, brittle. So 3 days later, Emma called you asking if she could borrow money for groceries. You told me she was, quote, hitting rock bottom again, and maybe it would teach her responsibility if we didn't help her. The memory hit me like a physical blow. I'd been between smaller freelance contracts, waiting for my business account transfers to clear, and I'd had exactly $12 in my personal checking account. I'd swallowed my pride and called Natalie, who'd lectured me about financial responsibility before suggesting I apply for retail jobs. Emma was asking for help, David continued, while I was literally sitting in my father's office listening to him praise E.C. Sterling's latest project. A project that, according to Mr. Harrison, paid out over $200,000. Harrison was watching this unfold with the careful attention of someone who was beginning to piece together a much larger puzzle. You suspected your sister was E.C. Sterling." "She didn't suspect," I said quietly, the realization hitting me like ice water. "She knew." Natalie's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Oh, please. You think I'm some kind of mastermind?" "I had suspicions, maybe, but I didn't know anything for certain." "What suspicions?" David demanded. Natalie looked trapped, her perfect composure finally cracking completely. "Fine. Yes, I wondered. Emma was always obsessed with—" "I tried to figure it out," Natalie admitted. "I looked through her mail once when I visited. I saw statements from a business bank account, but the amounts were blocked out. I saw payment confirmations from freelancing platforms, but they only showed partial information." "But you knew enough," I said, my voice getting stronger as the pieces fell into place. "You knew I wasn't actually struggling the way you told everyone I was." "I knew you were hiding something," Natalie snapped, "but I didn't know what. And you never told me the truth, because every time I tried to talk about my work, you made it clear you thought it was worthless. You called it my computer stuff like it was a hobby. You introduced me to people as your sister who plays with technology." David looked sick. "Jesus, Natalie. You let her ask us for grocery money when you suspected she was earning 6 figures?" I didn't know for sure. But even as she said it, her voice was losing strength. "What about Mom and Dad?" I asked, the question forming even as I dreaded the answer. "You said they were struggling with their mortgage. What was that really about?" Natalie's silence was answer enough. "Tell me," I said, my voice harder now. "They weren't struggling," she admitted finally. "They were thinking about upgrading to a bigger house in Millbrook Heights. Dad wanted to be closer to his golf course, and Mom wanted a place where she could host proper dinner parties. And you told them I couldn't help because I was broke. You were acting broke. Living in that tiny apartment, shopping at discount stores, never spending money on anything. Because I was reinvesting everything back into my business. Because I was building something." Harrison stepped forward slightly. "Ms. Castellano, forgive me for asking, but how did your parents react when they learned they couldn't count on Emma's financial help?" Natalie looked like she wanted to disappear into the stone terrace. "They were disappointed. They said maybe Emma would be more motivated to get a real job if she couldn't rely on family to bail her out whenever her, quote, projects didn't work out." "So you told them my projects weren't working out," I said slowly. "I told them what I observed. You were living like someone who was barely getting by. Because you never asked me directly about my financial situation. You never said, 'Emma, are you actually okay? Do you actually need help?' You just assumed, and then you told everyone else to assume the same thing." David was staring at his fiancé like he'd never seen her before. "Natalie, do you understand what you've done? Emma's been isolated from her own family because they think she's a failure. They think she can't support herself. That's not my fault." Natalie's voice was rising now, desperate. "She's the one who chose to be secretive. She's the one who used a fake name. She's the one who never corrected anyone's assumptions. Because those assumptions protected me," I shot back. "Because I learned a long time ago that when people in this family know you're capable of something, they find ways to tear you down or take credit for it." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Harrison was very still beside us, and I realized that this conversation was revealing far more. "Of course. Remember how you told everyone at the award ceremony that you helped me with the research because I was too shy to ask the right questions?" Natalie's face flushed. "I was trying to be supportive. You were trying to make sure everyone knew you were part of my success. Just like you told Mom and Dad that my scholarship to Riverside University was partly because you helped me with my application essays." "I did help you. You proofread them once. I wrote every word myself." David looked between us, his expression growing more troubled by the minute. "There's more, isn't there?" I looked at him, then at Harrison, who was listening to this family implosion with professional poker face. "Yes, there's more." Natalie seemed to shrink into herself. "Emma, please." "Please what? Please keep protecting your reputation? Please keep pretending that you didn't systematically undermine my relationship with our parents for years?" "I never." You told them I dropped out of my master's program because I was lazy and couldn't handle the workload. That's what you told me. No. That's what you assumed when I said it wasn't working out. I never explained the real reason, because every time I tried to talk about the problems with my advisor, you told me I was making excuses. Harrison cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps I should. No, I said firmly. Actually, I think you should hear this, because it's about to explain why I've been so careful about keeping my professional identity separate from my personal one. I turned back to Natalie, who looked like she was about to cry. You want to know why I never told this family about E.C. Sterling? Because I knew that the moment I did, someone would find a way to make it about them. Or they'd find reasons why it didn't really count. Or they'd start expecting me to solve everyone's problems with my success. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sounds of the party continuing inside, oblivious to the fact that everything was unraveling on the terrace. The sound of approaching footsteps from inside the country club made us all turn toward the French doors. Through the glass, I could see my parents making their way through the crowd, their faces etched with confusion and what looked like barely contained panic. Behind them, several other family members were following, aunts, uncles, cousins, all wearing expressions that suggested the news of my secret identity had spread through the party like wildfire. "Oh God," Natalie whispered, her remaining composure crumbling entirely. "They're coming out here." David straightened his tie nervously. "Maybe we should move this conversation somewhere more private." "No," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "I'm tired of private conversations and family secrets. If they want answers, they can have them right here." Harrison stepped closer to me, lowering his voice. "Emma, are you sure about this? Family confrontations can get messy, and you don't owe anyone an explanation about your business decisions." Before I could respond, the French doors opened and my parents stepped onto the terrace. My mother, Patricia Castellano, looked every inch the refined Millbrook Heights socialite in her navy Chanel suit, but her usual composed expression was fractured with confusion and something that looked almost like fear. My father, Robert, had the same bewildered look he got whenever technology was involved, like he'd just discovered that his toaster could speak French. "Emma," my mother said, her voice carefully controlled but with an underlying tremor, "people inside are saying the most ridiculous things. Something about you being a secret consultant? Making hundreds of thousands of dollars? Surely there's been some mistake." "No mistake," Harrison said before I could respond. He extended his hand professionally. "Yes, Dad, it's true." "But," my mother's voice trailed off as she looked between Natalie and me. "But Natalie said you were struggling. She said you could barely afford rent, that you were living on ramen noodles and pride." I felt that familiar knot in my stomach, the same one I'd carried through every family gathering for the past 3 years. "When did she tell you that?" "Just last month," my father said slowly. "When we asked if you might want to join us for that cruise to the Mediterranean. Natalie said there was no point in even mentioning it, because you couldn't afford the airfare to meet us at the port." The cruise. I remembered Natalie mentioning it in passing, saying our parents were taking a family trip, but not to worry about it because it was just for the people who could actually afford nice things. I'd assumed I wasn't invited. "I was never asked about any cruise," I said quietly. My mother's face went pale. But Natalie said a lot of things, apparently. I looked at my sister, who was now gripping David's arm like a lifeline. "Tell them, Natalie. Tell them about all the things you said on my behalf." "I was trying to protect you," Natalie said desperately. "I thought if they knew you were hiding money, they'd be hurt that you weren't helping with family expenses." "What family expenses?" I asked. My parents exchanged a look that made my stomach drop even further. "The emergency fund," my father said slowly. "For Grandma Rose's medical bills." The world seemed to tilt sideways. "What medical bills? Grandma Rose is fine. I just talked to her last week." "She was fine," my mother corrected gently. "After we paid for her surgery, Her insurance didn't cover the experimental treatment for her heart condition. We had to come up with $40,000 in 3 months. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. When? When did this happen? Last spring, my father said. Around the time you were supposedly struggling with that eviction notice. What eviction notice? I turned to stare at Natalie. I was never facing eviction. Natalie's voice was barely a whisper. You said your landlord was raising your rent and you didn't know if you could afford to stay. Because I was deciding whether to move to a better apartment. I was asking your advice about neighborhoods, not begging for money. The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison stood slightly apart from our family cluster, watching this revelation unfold with the careful attention of someone who is beginning to understand just how deep this deception ran. So while Grandma Rose needed surgery, I said, my voice getting stronger and angrier, while our family needed $40,000, Natalie told you I was facing eviction and couldn't help. We didn't want to burden you, my mother said weakly. Natalie said you were already stressed about money. And where did the $40,000 come from? Another exchanged look between my parents. We mortgaged the house, my father admitted, extended the loan term, increased the monthly payments. We'll be paying it off until we're 80. I felt sick. While my parents were taking on debt they couldn't afford to save my grandmother's life, I had been sitting on a business account worth over $1 million, completely unaware that my family was in crisis. There's more, David said quietly, his face gray with what looked like dawning horror. Isn't there, Natalie? Natalie looked like she wanted to disappear into the stone terrace. David, please. Tell them about the college fund, he said, his voice flat. What college fund? I asked. My mother's hand went to her throat. Your cousin Jessica's college fund. The one we couldn't contribute to because my father's face was turning red, but not with anger, with shame. We told him we couldn't help because we were already supporting you through your difficult period. Jesus Christ, I whispered. How many people needed help that I never knew about? The question hung in the evening air like an accusation. Harrison cleared his throat diplomatically. Perhaps, he said carefully, there's been a significant breakdown in family communication. Breakdown? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. This wasn't a breakdown, this was systematic. Natalie has been managing the family's perception of my financial situation for years. I was trying to protect everyone. Natalie burst out, tears finally starting to flow down her cheeks. I didn't know how much money you actually had. I just knew you were hiding something. So you decided to tell everyone I was broke? I thought if I was wrong, if you really were struggling, then at least the family wouldn't pressure you for money you didn't have. And if I was right, if you were hiding success, then maybe the isolation would make you finally tell the truth. The confession hit the group like a physical blow. Even Harrison looked shocked at the calculated nature of what she'd done. You isolated me from my own family as a manipulation tactic, I said slowly, making sure I understood correctly. I thought it would work. I thought you'd eventually get tired of being seen as the failure, and you'd prove everyone wrong. By destroying my relationships with everyone I love, by forcing you to be honest. My father stepped forward, his voice shaking with something I'd never heard from him before. Rage. Natalie, do you understand what you've done? Emma could have saved the house. She could have paid for Mom's surgery without us going into debt. She could have helped Marco keep his restaurant open. I didn't know, Natalie screamed. I didn't know she had that much money. But you knew she wasn't actually struggling, David said quietly. You told me so yourself, just tonight. You said you'd seen evidence that she was hiding financial success. The weight of what had been lost was settling over all of us like a heavy blanket. 3 years of family events where I'd been treated like the charity case. 3 years of my parents' scrimp and saving, taking on debt, making sacrifices, all because they believed I needed protection rather than being able to provide it. "There's something else," my mother said suddenly, her voice barely audible. "Something we need to tell you, Emma." I wasn't sure I could handle any more revelations, but I nodded. "Your trust fund," she said, "from your great-aunt Margaret. It matured when you turned 25. I stared at her. "What trust fund?" "The one Natalie said you'd asked us not to mention because you wanted to prove you could make it on your own." The betrayal was so complete, so systematic that I actually felt dizzy. "How much?" $250,000, my father said quietly. "It's been sitting in an account for 3 years, earning interest, waiting for you to claim it." The terrace fell silent, except for the sound of Natalie's quiet sobbing and the distant music from the party that was still continuing inside, oblivious to the fact that an entire family was imploding just outside the doors. Harrison spoke into the silence, his voice professionally neutral but with an undercurrent of something that might have been sympathy. "It sounds like there are quite a few financial and legal matters that need to be sorted out," he said carefully. "Emma, when you're ready, I think there are some conversations we should have about your future. But for now, perhaps you need some time to process this with your family." I looked around at the faces surrounding me. My parents, stunned and ashamed. David, horrified at what his fiancé had orchestrated. Natalie, crying but still somehow managing to look like the victim in all of this. "No," I said finally. "I think I've heard enough for one night." The weight of everything that had been revealed was... "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "let's finish this conversation. All of it. Right now." Harrison looked at me with what might have been admiration. "Are you sure? This is a lot to process." "I'm sure, because I'm tired of decisions being made about my life without my input." I turned to face my parents directly. "Mom, Dad, I need you to understand something. The person Natalie described to you, the struggling, unemployed daughter who needed protection and couldn't handle adult responsibilities, that person never existed." My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue she'd pulled from her purse. "But you seemed so directionless after you left graduate school." "I seemed private," I corrected. "There's a difference. I was building something, but I'd learned that in this family, sharing your dreams before they're bulletproof usually means watching them get torn apart by people who think they're helping." My father shifted uncomfortably. "We just wanted to support you." By assuming I was incapable of supporting myself? By believing every narrative Natalie fed you without ever asking me directly about my situation? "We didn't want to embarrass you," my mother said weakly. "But you were fine with embarrassing me in front of 50 people tonight?" I gestured toward the French doors, where guests were still clearly visible through the glass, many of them watching our family drama unfold with barely concealed fascination. David cleared his throat. "Emma, I owe you an apology, a massive one. I should have connected the dots about E.C. Sterling months ago. I should have questioned why Natalie was so certain about your financial struggles when the evidence didn't really add up." "What evidence?" my father asked. David looked at Natalie, who was still crying but had gone very quiet. "Little things. Emma would mention taking expensive courses, buying professional equipment, traveling to tech conferences. When I asked Natalie about it, she always had explanations. Emma's being irresponsible with credit cards, or she's probably using student loans, or she's always been bad with money. "I wasn't lying," Natalie said defensively. "I really thought those things might be true." "But you never asked Emma to clarify," Harrison observed. "You preferred your assumptions to actual information." The truth of that statement hung in the air. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw something I'd never noticed before. Fear. Not just embarrassment at being caught, but genuine terror. "Natalie," I said quietly, "what are you so afraid of?" She looked up at me with mascara-streaked cheeks. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what were you so afraid would happen if people knew I was successful?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She opened her mouth, closed it, then looked around at our family as if searching for support that wasn't coming. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. I kept my voice gentle but firm. You've spent 3 years managing everyone's perception of my life. That takes effort, planning, constant vigilance. People don't do that unless they're afraid of something specific. Harrison was watching this exchange with the attention of someone who spent his professional life reading people and situations. In business, he said carefully, we call that narrative control. Usually it happens when someone believes their position or value is threatened by competing information. Natalie shot him a sharp look. This isn't a business meeting. No, I said, but it is about competition, isn't it? About positioning within the family hierarchy. My parents looked confused, but David was nodding slowly. The golden child and the problem child, he said quietly. Classic family dynamic. I wasn't trying to be the golden child, Natalie protested. That's ridiculous. Is it? When we were kids, you were the pretty one, the popular one, the one who got good grades easily. I was the weird one who spent too much time with computers. That dynamic worked for everyone. You gotta be special, and I gotta be manageable. My mother looked stricken. Emma, we never meant to make you feel. I'm not blaming you, I said quickly. Family dynamics just happen sometimes. But when I started showing signs of actual success, of building something real, that threatened the established order. So you think I sabotaged you? Natalie's voice was rising again. I think you managed information to maintain a status quo that felt safe to you. The problem is, your safety came at the cost of my relationships with everyone else in this family. Harrison stepped forward slightly. If I may, he said diplomatically, this kind of thing happens in corporate environments all the time. Someone gets so invested in a particular narrative about themselves or others that they unconsciously work to maintain it, even when new information contradicts it. Thank you for the psychology lesson, Natalie snapped, but this is my family, not your boardroom. You're right, Harrison said calmly. But the principles of honest communication work the same way everywhere. I felt a surge of gratitude toward this man who barely knew me, but was providing exactly the kind of objective perspective this conversation needed. Here's what I need to know, I said, looking around at my family. Going forward, can we operate with actual information instead of assumptions and secondhand reports? Of course, my father said immediately. That means if you want to know about my financial situation, you ask me directly. If you need help with something, you come to me first, not to Natalie to ask if I'm capable of helping. Emma, my mother said hesitantly, about your grandmother's surgery and the mortgage and all the times we could have. We'll figure it out, I said firmly. But first, I need to know that everyone understands what happened here. Natalie didn't just make some innocent mistakes. She systematically controlled information flow in this family for years. I was trying to protect everyone, Natalie said, but her voice lacked conviction now. You were trying to control everyone, I corrected, and the cost was enormous. Not just to me, but to everyone who needed help and didn't get it, because you convinced them I couldn't provide it. David was staring at his fiancé with an expression I couldn't quite read. Natalie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. She looked at him warily. What? When my father was talking about E.C. Sterling at dinner last month, when he mentioned that Harrison Dynamics was trying to recruit this consultant for a permanent position, what did you think? Natalie was quiet for a long moment. I thought it might be Emma, she admitted finally. And what did you do with that information? Another long pause. Nothing. Nothing? David's voice was sharp now. You knew Emma might be in line for a major job offer? And you said nothing? I wasn't sure. But you were sure enough to keep sabotaging her reputation with the family. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Natalie looked around at all of us, And I could see the exact moment when she realized that her version of events wasn't going to hold up under scrutiny. "Fine," she said, her voice suddenly hard. "You want the truth? Yes, I suspected Emma was more successful than she was letting on. Yes, I thought it was unfair that she got to be secretive and mysterious, while the rest of us had to be transparent about our lives. Yes, I was angry that she got to be the victim, while also potentially being more successful than any of us." The honesty was startling in its bitterness. So yes, maybe I did manage information, maybe I did make sure that her secrecy came with "Good," she said, and then immediately looked shocked that she'd said it out loud. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the distant party sounds seemed to fade away. Harrison broke the quiet with a careful observation. "In my experience, when someone says good about another person's pain, the relationship has moved beyond repair." "That's not what I meant," Natalie said quickly, but we all knew it was exactly what she meant. I looked at my sister, this person I'd spent my entire life trying to please, trying not to threaten, trying to love despite feeling like I was never quite good enough, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, exactly. More like release. "Okay," I said simply. "Now I know where we stand." The admission that Natalie was actually glad I'd been isolated hit the group like a physical blow. David stepped back from his fiancée as if she'd become radioactive. My parents looked like they'd been slapped. And even Harrison, who'd maintained professional composure throughout this entire family implosion, seemed taken aback by the raw honesty of her confession. "Natalie," my mother whispered, her voice barely audible. "How could you say such a thing?" "Because it's true," Natalie exploded, all pretense finally abandoned. "Do you have any idea what it's like being Emma's sister? Saint Emma, who's so smart, so special, so naturally gifted at everything she touches?" "What are you talking about?" I asked, genuinely confused. "You've been the successful one our entire lives. You're the one with the perfect career, the perfect relationship, the perfect everything." "Perfect?" Natalie laughed, but it was a bitter, broken sound. "My perfect career is working as a marketing coordinator at a mid-level firm, making $60,000 a year. My perfect relationship is with a man whose family fortune makes me feel like a charity case half the time." David's face went pale. "Natalie, you never told me you felt that way." "Because I couldn't. Because admitting I felt inferior would have made me actually inferior." She turned back to me, tears streaming down her face, but her voice getting stronger, more vicious. "Do you know what it was like growing up with you? Everyone always talking about how brilliant you were, how you saw things differently, how you were going to change the world someday." "That's not how I remember it," I said quietly. "Of course it's not, because you were too busy being modest and self-deprecating to notice how it felt to be the normal sister. The one who had to work twice as hard to get half the recognition." My father stepped forward. "Natalie, that's not fair. You were valedictorian. You got into a great college. You've had a successful career." "Successful compared to what?" she shouted. "I was valedictorian because I studied constantly, while Emma just naturally understood everything. I got into a good college, but Emma got into a better one, with scholarships I could never qualify for. I have a decent job, but apparently Emma's been secretly earning more in a year than I make in 3. The pain in her voice was real, raw, and completely at odds with the calculated manipulation she'd been orchestrating for years. Harrison was watching this with the fascination of someone witnessing a complete psychological breakdown in real time. "So you decided to tear me down," I said, "and for the first time tonight, I felt truly angry. You decided that if you couldn't be better than me, you'd make sure everyone thought you were." "I didn't plan it," Natalie protested. "It just happened. When you dropped out of graduate school, when you started living so simply, when you seemed to be struggling, For the first time in our lives, I was the one who had it together. I was the one our parents were proud of. I was the one people looked up to. And when you started suspecting I wasn't actually struggling, I couldn't let it go back to the way it was before. The words came out like a dam bursting. I couldn't go back to being the less impressive sister, the one who peaked in high school while you went on to actually change the world. David was staring at her like he'd never seen her before. So you deliberately sabotaged her relationships with your family to maintain your position. I maintained the status. The accusation was so twisted, so completely backwards, that for a moment no one knew how to respond. We mortgaged our house, my father said finally, his voice shaking with emotion. We went into debt we can't afford, gave up retirement savings, and watched family members struggle. All because we believed you when you said Emma couldn't help. That's not my fault. I didn't know she was secretly rich. But you knew she wasn't actually poor, David shouted, finally losing his composure completely. You knew, and you let it happen anyway. Because I deserved to be the successful one for once, Natalie screamed back. Because I worked for it. Because I played by the rules while Emma got to be mysterious and special and different. I wasn't trying to be special, I said, my voice cutting through their argument. I was trying to survive in a family where my successes were either ignored or appropriated, and my failures were broadcast to everyone. Oh, please. You loved being the misunderstood genius. I loved being left alone to work. I loved not having to explain myself or justify my choices, or watch someone else take credit for my ideas. Like when? Natalie demanded. Like my senior thesis, which you somehow convinced Mom and Dad you co-authored. Like my first freelance contract, which you told everyone was just a little side project until you found out it paid well. Then suddenly you'd always known I had potential. Like every single achievement in my life that you either minimized or claimed partial credit for. My parents were looking between us with growing horror, clearly recognizing patterns they'd never noticed before. I never claimed credit for your work, Natalie said, but her voice lacked conviction. You did it subtly. Oh, Emma's always been good with computers, but she learned a lot from helping me with my projects in high school. Emma's smart, but she needed guidance to focus her talents properly. Emma's making progress, partly because our family has been so supportive. Harrison was nodding slightly, recognizing the pattern. Credit by association, he said quietly. Very common in competitive environments. This isn't a competition, Natalie snapped. Everything has been a competition for you, I shot back. Every family gathering, every achievement, every conversation. You've spent our entire lives making sure that even when I succeeded, you somehow came out looking better. Because if I didn't, I'd disappear completely. Because in a family with Emma Castellano, the secret tech genius, what space is there for Natalie Castellano, the perfectly ordinary marketing coordinator? The raw pain in her voice stopped me short. For the first time, I glimpsed the fear and insecurity that had been driving her behavior for years. So you made sure I'd be seen as the failure, I said quietly. I made sure the playing field was level, she corrected, by lying to our entire family for 3 years. By protecting myself from being completely overshadowed by my perfect sister. I'm not perfect, I exploded, finally losing my own composure. I'm socially awkward. I struggle with relationships. I've spent most of my adult life feeling like an outsider in my own family. I worked 18-hour days in isolation because it was easier than trying to connect with people who made me feel like I was too much or not enough. At least you're extraordinary at something. Being extraordinary doesn't mean being happy. It doesn't mean being loved. It doesn't mean feeling like you belong anywhere. The words hung in the air between us, revealing decades of pain on both sides. David looked sick, my parents looked devastated, and Harrison was maintaining his professional mask but clearly feeling the weight of this very personal implosion. You know what the really tragic part is? I said, my voice quieter now but no less intense. We could have been allies. We could have supported each other instead of competing. But Natalie looked around the terrace at all of us, her family, her fiancé, a CEO who was witnessing her complete psychological breakdown. And I saw the exact moment when she realized that her carefully constructed world was collapsing entirely. "Fine," she said, her voice suddenly cold and controlled again. "You want to be the successful one? Be the successful one. You want to be the family hero? Be the family hero. But don't expect me to apologize for protecting myself from being crushed by your shadow." "I never wanted to cast a shadow over you," I said sadly. "I just wanted to exist without having to apologize for it." "Well, congratulations," she said bitterly. "You can stop apologizing now. You win." The finality in her voice made it clear that something fundamental had broken between us, something that might never be repaired. David was staring at his fiancée with an expression of complete devastation. "Natalie, do you understand what you've done? Do you understand how this looks?" I'm finally being honest about something everyone already knew," she said defiantly. I'm tired of pretending that Emma's success doesn't make the rest of us look ordinary by comparison." "It makes you look petty," my father said quietly. "It makes you look cruel." "It makes me look human," she shot back, which is apparently not allowed in the Saint Emma narrative. And with that, she turned and walked back toward the French doors, leaving the rest of us standing in the wreckage of everything we'd thought we knew about our family. The silence that followed Natalie's dramatic exit was profound and heavy, like the aftermath of an explosion when the dust is still settling and everyone is checking for damage. Through the French doors, I could see her moving through the party, her posture rigid with defiance, accepting concerned touches on her arm from guests who had no idea what had just transpired on the terrace. David stood frozen where she'd left him, staring at the doors as if he could will her to come back and somehow undo everything she'd just revealed. My parents looked like they'd aged a decade in the past hour, and Harrison maintained his professional composure, but I could see the calculation in his eyes, the CEO mind processing information and adjusting strategies in real time. "I should go after her," David said finally, but he made no move toward the doors. "Should you?" my father asked quietly. "David, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Did you know about any of this?" David ran both hands through his hair, destroying what was left of his careful styling. "I knew something was off." Natalie would get strange whenever Emma's name came up, defensive in ways that didn't make sense. But I thought it was just normal family dynamics. "There's nothing normal about systematically isolating a family member," Harrison observed, his voice carefully neutral. "I know that now," David said miserably. "But when you're inside it, when someone you love is telling you their version of events over and over, you start to believe it's true." My mother was dabbing at her eyes again, but these tears looked different. Not just sad, but angry. 3 years, she said. 3 years we believed our daughter was struggling, and we did nothing because Natalie convinced us it would hurt Emma's pride to offer help. What hurts, my father added, his voice rough with emotion, is realizing how many conversations we avoided having. How many times we walked on eggshells around Emma because we thought she was fragile. I felt a stab of recognition. Is that why family gatherings always felt so careful? Like everyone was afraid I might break if they said the wrong thing? "We thought you were barely holding it together," my mother admitted. "Natalie said you were too proud to admit you were struggling, so we tried to be supportive without being obvious about it." Which made me feel like there was something wrong with me that everyone could see but no one would talk about, I said, the pieces clicking into place. Like I was the family charity case that everyone was tiptoeing around. Harrison stepped, because in my experience, that level of technical innovation doesn't happen overnight. It requires years of dedicated learning, experimentation, failure, and growth. which means you've been essentially operating as a senior-level tech professional while your family believed you were unemployed. Underemployed, I corrected automatically, then stopped. Actually, no, you're right. They thought I was essentially unemployed. Do you understand how extraordinary that is? Harrison continued. Most people can't maintain that level of professional development in isolation. It requires incredible self-motivation and confidence. Or incredible stubbornness, I said with a weak smile. Perhaps. But what I'm getting at is this. The person your family thought they were protecting doesn't exist. The person you actually are is someone who built $1 million consulting business while everyone around her believed she was failing. That's not fragility, that's resilience. The validation hit me like a physical force. For 3 years, I'd been carrying this weight of feeling like I was somehow broken, somehow less capable than everyone thought I should be. But Harrison was right. What I'd actually done was build something extraordinary while carrying the psychological burden of feeling like a disappointment. She was always resilient, my father said quietly, even as a child. When other kids made fun of her for being different, she just adapted, found ways to work around them, including adapting to a family dynamic that required her to be small, Harrison observed. David looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean that healthy families celebrate each member's strengths without feeling threatened by them. Unhealthy families require some members to diminish themselves so others can feel adequate. We never asked Emma to diminish herself, my mother protested. Not directly, Harrison agreed. But if I'm understanding the pattern correctly, Emma learned early that her successes created problems, either because they were minimized, appropriated, or turned into sources of family tension. So she adapted by hiding her achievements. Which made it easy for Natalie to control the narrative, David said, understanding dawning on his face. Emma wasn't hiding her success from malicious intent. She was protecting it. Protecting it from what? My father asked. I took a deep breath. From being made about someone else. From being explained away. From being turned into evidence of why I didn't fit in the family. The words came out more honestly than I had intended, revealing a pain I'd been carrying for so long I'd almost forgotten it wasn't normal. Emma, my mother said, her voice breaking slightly, we never wanted you to feel like you didn't fit. But I did feel that way. And when Natalie started managing everyone's perception of my life, it just confirmed what I already believed, that there was no space in this family for who I actually was. Harrison was nodding slowly. And the more successful you became professionally, the more isolated you felt personally. Exactly. Success in my work was the only place where I felt competent, valuable, seen for what I could actually do, rather than what I couldn't. Which explains why you were so protective of your professional identity, David said. It was the one part of your life that was purely yours. Until tonight, I said. When it got dragged into the family dysfunction, whether I wanted it to be or not. Harrison looked thoughtful. Emma, can I ask what you want to happen now? With the job offer, with your family relationships, with all of this. I looked around at the faces surrounding me. My parents, guilt-ridden and confused. David, clearly reevaluating everything he thought he knew about his fiancée and her family. Harrison, offering me opportunities I'd never dared to imagine. Through the French doors, I could see Natalie. It means I want to take the job. It means I want to claim my trust fund and pay off my parents' mortgage. It means I want to help Uncle Marco save his restaurant and contribute to Jessica's college fund. I paused, looking directly at my parents. And it means I want to have direct relationships with you that aren't filtered through Natalie's interpretation of who I am or what I need. My father's eyes filled with tears. Emma, we owe you such an enormous apology. You owe me honesty going forward, I corrected. And maybe some time to figure out how to be a family that doesn't require anyone to be smaller than they are. What about Natalie? My mother asked quietly. I looked through the doors at my sister, who was laughing at something one of her friends had said, her earlier breakdown completely hidden behind her social mask. "I don't know," I admitted. "Tonight she showed me who she really is, and who she really thinks I am. I'm not sure there's a way back from that level of honesty." David was staring at his fiancée through the glass, his expression unreadable. "I need to talk to her. About everything. About whether the person I fell in love with actually exists, or if she was just another performance." Harrison stepped forward slightly. "If I may offer some perspective from someone outside this family system, what happened here tonight was necessary. Painful, but necessary. You can't build healthy relationships on false information, and you can't solve problems you won't acknowledge exist." "So what now?" I asked. "Now," Harrison said with a slight smile, "you decide what you want your life to look like when you're not carrying other people's expectations of your limitations." I looked down at the job offer envelope, then back at my parents, who were watching me with expressions of hope mixed with apprehension. "I think," I said finally, "it's time to find out what that looks like." The distant sound of applause from inside the party reminded us that there was still an engagement celebration happening, still a room full of people who had no idea that everything they thought they knew about the Castellano family had just been completely rewritten. But for the first time in years, I felt like I knew exactly who I was and where I belonged in my own story. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses from inside the country club felt surreal, like we were existing in two different worlds. The polite social gathering where people made small talk about golf handicaps and vacation plans, and this raw, exposed space on the terrace where my family's carefully constructed facade had just been demolished. David was still staring through the French doors at Natalie, who had positioned herself near the champagne fountain and was animatedly telling some story to a circle of her sorority friends. Her performance was flawless, the radiant bride-to-be graciously accepting congratulations, her earlier breakdown completely erased behind a mask of social perfection. "I need to end this," David said suddenly, his voice hollow but determined. "The party?" my mother asked. "The engagement." He turned to face us, and I was struck by how much older he looked than he had an hour ago. "I can't marry someone who would systematically destroy her sister's relationships to protect her own ego. I can't build a life with someone who sees love as a zero-sum game." My father placed a hand on David's shoulder. "Son, maybe you should take some time to think about this. You're both emotional right now." "No," David said firmly. "This isn't about emotion." Harrison was watching this conversation with the careful attention of someone who was trying to decide whether to stay or diplomatically excuse himself from what was clearly becoming an even more personal family crisis. "David," I said quietly, "I appreciate you standing up for me, but I don't want to be responsible for ending your relationship." "You're not responsible," he said, looking directly at me. "Natalie is. She made her choices, and now I have to make mine." He paused, his voice getting stronger. "The woman I fell in love with was supposed to be kind, loyal, supportive. Someone who built people up instead of tearing them down. Either I was completely wrong about who she was, or she's changed into someone I don't recognize." Through the glass, we could see Natalie glance toward the terrace, her eyes meeting David's for a moment before she quickly looked away and said something that made her friends laugh louder. "She knows," my mother observed. "She can see us out here, and she knows this conversation is happening." "Then she also knows what needs to happen next," David said. He straightened his tie, smoothed his hair, and walked toward the French doors with the grim determination of someone heading into battle. We watched through the glass as he approached Natalie's group. The friends melted away as he took her elbow, guiding her toward a quieter corner of the room. Even from a distance, we could see the conversation was tense, Natalie's animated gestures becoming sharper, David's posture growing more rigid. "Should we go inside?" my father asked. "This feels like we're spying." "We are spying," Harrison said matter-of-factly. "But given what's transpired tonight, I think Emma has a legitimate interest in the outcome of this conversation." He was right. After 3 years of having my life discussed and decisions made about me without my input, I felt entitled to witness the consequences of tonight's revelations playing out in real time. The conversation between David and Natalie was getting more heated. Other guests were starting to notice, subtle glances and whispered comments rippling through the room. Natalie's face was flushed, her hands moving in sharp, defensive gestures. David remained still, his arms crossed, his expression implacable. Then Natalie's voice rose enough that we could hear fragments through the glass. Completely unreasonable. And family loyalty. And always been jealous. David shook his head firmly and started to walk away. Natalie grabbed his arm, her voice rising further. "You can't just leave. This is our engagement party." The room had gone quiet now, 50 guests pretending not to watch the drama unfolding in their midst. David gently but firmly removed Natalie's hand from his arm and said something too quiet for us to hear. Then he walked toward the French doors. "We need to go," he said as he stepped back onto the terrace. "All of us, now." "What happened?" my mother asked. "I ended it, officially, in front of everyone." David's voice was steady, but I could see his hands shaking slightly. "I told her that I couldn't marry someone who would hurt her own family for personal gain, and that I'd realized I didn't actually know who she was." "How did she take it?" Harrison asked. "About as well as you'd expect. She told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life, that Emma had manipulated me into believing lies, and that she hoped I'd be happy with my, quote, perfect little genius, since that's apparently what I wanted." I felt a chill. "She thinks there's something between us?" "She thinks everything is a competition," David corrected, "including my loyalty. She couldn't understand that this isn't about choosing sides. It's about choosing integrity." Through the doors, we could see Natalie standing alone near the champagne fountain, her friends having scattered like startled birds. Her perfect composure was finally cracking, tears streaming down her cheeks as she looked around the room at all the guests who were now openly staring. "She's going to blame me for this," I said quietly. "Let her," David said firmly. "The truth is that she destroyed her own relationship by revealing who she really is. You didn't make her say those things. You just created the circumstance." He was right. An hour ago, I'd been a secretly successful freelancer, living a deliberately small life to avoid family conflict. Now I was a publicly acknowledged tech executive whose family relationships had been permanently altered, whose sister had just been publicly dumped at her own engagement party, and whose professional identity was no longer a secret worth protecting. "I'll take the position," I said without hesitation. "When do you need me to start?" "Immediately, if possible. We have several critical projects that have been waiting for the right leadership, and frankly, after tonight, I'm even more convinced that you're exactly what our company needs." "Why?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Because you've just demonstrated something I rarely see in executive candidates, the ability to maintain your integrity under extreme pressure. You could have thrown your sister under the bus hours ago or used your hidden success as a weapon against your family. Instead, you focused on understanding the truth and finding a path forward." My parents were watching this exchange with expressions of pride mixed with bewilderment, still trying to process the rapid transformation of their daughter from family disappointment to corporate executive. "There's something else," Harrison continued. "The logistics platform you mentioned, the one you've been developing as a side project. I'd like to see it." "When?" "Tomorrow. Can you meet me at our downtown office at 10? I nodded, feeling like I was agreeing to step into an entirely different life. "What about—" I gestured toward the French doors, where Natalie was now being comforted by a few remaining friends, while the rest of the guests were clearly preparing to leave this social disaster. "What about it?" Harrison asked. "Emma, you can't control other people's reactions to your success. You can only control how you respond to their reactions." David was gathering himself to go back inside, presumably to collect his things and make some kind of announcement to the remaining guests. "I should handle the aftermath in there, make sure people understand that this isn't Emma's fault." It's not your responsibility to manage other people's perceptions of me, I said. But thank you. As David headed back inside, my parents and I stood on the terrace with Harrison, watching through the glass as the engagement party officially disintegrated. Guests were making their excuses and heading for the exits, leaving Natalie standing alone in her cream-colored dress among the orchids and champagne flutes, the perfect party decorations now looking like props for a play that had ended badly. So my father said finally, "What happens now?" I looked at the Harrison Dynamics envelope in my hands, then at my parents, then through the doors at my sister, who was staring back at us with an expression of pure hatred. "Now," I said, "I stop apologizing for taking up space in my own life." And for the first time in years, I meant it completely. The drive to Harrison Dynamics' downtown headquarters the next morning felt like traveling between two different versions of my life. In the rearview mirror was the cramped studio apartment in Riverside, where I'd spent 3 years hiding my success, and ahead was a gleaming 40-story tower that represented everything I'd been afraid to reach for. I'd barely slept after the disaster at the country club. My phone had been buzzing constantly with calls and texts. Some from family members who'd heard about the engagement party implosion, others from Natalie's friends wanting my side of the story, and several from numbers I didn't recognize that turned out to be Harrison Dynamics employees who'd somehow gotten wind of my hiring and wanted to welcome me to the company. The only call I'd answered was from my parents at 7 in the morning. "Emma," my mother had said, her voice still thick with exhaustion and emotion, "we've been up all night talking about everything that happened. About everything we missed, everything we failed to see." "Mom." "No, let me finish. We need you to know that we're proud of you, not just for your professional success, but for how you handled yourself last night. You had every right to be angry, to lash out, to make the whole family pay for what Natalie did. But you did." Now, standing in the marble lobby of Harrison Dynamics, I tried to push aside the emotional chaos of the past 12 hours and focus on the professional opportunity in front of me. The security guard directed me to the 42nd floor, where Harrison's assistant, a crisp woman named Margaret Chen, greeted me with a smile that suggested she already knew my entire story. "Mr. Harrison is waiting for you in his office," she said, leading me down a hallway lined with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered stunning views of the city. "Can I get you coffee, tea, something stronger after last night?" I stopped walking. "You know about last night?" She gave me a sympathetic look. "Mr. Harrison briefed me this morning. He thought you might need some extra support today, given the circumstances." The thoughtfulness of this small gesture, anticipating that I might be emotionally raw and making sure I had an ally in the building, told me more about Harrison's leadership style than any corporate handbook could have. Harrison's office was exactly what I'd expected from a tech CEO: minimalist furniture, multiple monitors, and walls covered with patents, awards, and photos of him, with various world leaders and tech innovators. But what surprised me was the small conference table set up with printed copies of what looked like business plans, financial projections, and technical specifications. "Emma," Harrison said, standing to greet me with a firm handshake. "Thank you for coming in so quickly. I know last night was intense." "That's one word for it," I said, accepting his offer to sit at the conference table. "Before we discuss your official role here, I want to talk about your logistics platform. I had my team do some preliminary research this morning." He gestured to the papers spread across the table. "These are the business plans and financial projections for 3 companies that are attempting to solve similar problems to what you described." I leaned forward to look at the documents. One was a startup that had raised $40 million in venture capital. Another was a subsidiary of a major logistics company that had been working on predictive optimization for 2 years. The third was a consortium of small business associations that had commissioned a custom solution from a major consulting firm. "Okay," I said, not sure where this was leading. "All 3 of these approaches are fundamentally flawed," Harrison continued. "They're either too complex for small businesses to implement, too expensive for the target market, or too generic to provide meaningful value." "How do you know that?" "Because I spent 3 hours this morning talking to the entrepreneurs engineers, and business owners involved in these projects. And then I spent another hour reviewing the demo materials you sent me. I blinked. What demo materials? Harrison smiled and turned his laptop toward me. On the screen was a professional-looking dashboard, showing real-time logistics optimization for what appeared to be a small business network. The interface was clean, intuitive, and displayed exactly the kind of data insights I'd been developing in my prototype. Where did this come from? I asked. You built it. The coffee shop owner you mentioned yesterday, Maria Santos from Riverside Roasters. She's been using your system for 6 months. When I called her this morning to ask about her experience, she spent 20 minutes walking me through the interface and explaining how it had transformed her business. I felt a flush of pride mixed with nervousness. You called Maria? I called all of them. The bookstore owner, the delivery service, the restaurant that's been testing your inventory management module. Emma, you didn't just build a prototype. You built a fully functional platform that's already proving its value in the real world. He turned the laptop back toward himself and pulled up what looked like a conservative estimate. Small business logistics is a massive, underserved market. The existing solutions are either enterprise-level systems that cost hundreds of thousands to implement, or simple inventory apps that don't actually optimize anything. You've found the sweet spot. Sophisticated enough to provide real value, simple enough for a mom-and-pop shop to use. Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying my face. Emma, I didn't just offer you the CTO position because of your consulting work for us. I offered it because I think you're sitting on the next major disruption in small business technology. But it's just a side project. It's not even finished. The best innovations usually start as side projects. And from what I've seen, it's more finished than you think. He paused. The question is, what do you want to do with it? I looked at the business plans scattered across the table, thinking about the 3 years I'd spent working in isolation, building something I'd convinced myself was just a hobby. I want to help people. Small business owners like Maria, who are working 18-hour days, but still can't compete with big corporations because they don't have access to the same technology and data insights. Then let's help them. Harrison pulled out a fresh legal pad and started writing. Here's what I'm proposing. Harrison Dynamics will provide the funding, infrastructure, and business support to turn your platform into a full-scale company. You'll maintain majority ownership and complete creative control. We'll handle the business development, marketing, and scaling operations. What's the catch? No catch, but there are expectations. This isn't a hobby anymore. It's a business that could employ hundreds of people and serve thousands of small businesses. Are you ready for that level of responsibility? I thought about the conversation with my family last night, about Harrison's observation that I'd been living my life in reaction to other people's limitations. This was the opposite of that. This was building something based on my own vision of what was possible. Yes, I said, without hesitation. I'm ready. Harrison smiled and continued writing. Good, because I've already scheduled meetings with our legal team, our technology infrastructure group, and our business development department. If you're serious about this, we can have a preliminary business structure in place by the end of the week. That fast? Emma, you've spent 3 years building the foundation. Now we're just putting up the walls and roof. He looked up from his notes. There's something else. Given the family situation you're dealing with, I want to make sure you have the support you need to focus on this opportunity. What do you mean? I mean that family drama can be distracting when you're trying to launch a company. If you need time to resolve the situation with your sister, or if you need help managing the financial aspects of supporting your family, we have resources available. The thoughtfulness of this offer, the recognition that my professional success was connected to my personal well-being, was almost overwhelming. Mr. Harrison, I said, can I ask you something? Why are you doing this? Why are you investing so much in someone you met 12 hours ago? He was quiet for a moment, then leaned forward slightly. 20 years ago, I was in a similar situation. I had an idea for a technology platform that could revolutionize data analytics, But I was stuck in a corporate job where my innovations were being credited to my supervisors. A mentor took a chance on me, provided the resources and support I needed to build something of my own. And you want to pay it forward. I want to make sure that brilliance doesn't get wasted because someone doesn't have access to the right opportunities. He paused. Also, frankly, investing in your platform is good business. We're going to make a lot of money together. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years. Okay, let's do this. As Harrison called his assistant to confirm the afternoon meetings, I looked out at the city's skyline and realized that everything had changed. Yesterday, I'd been a secret freelancer hiding my success to avoid family conflict. 6 months after the engagement party that changed everything, I was standing in the conference room of Castellano Logistics, the company that had grown from my side project into a thriving business with 12 employees and over 200 small business clients. The irony of using my family name for the company wasn't lost on me, but it felt like reclaiming something that had always belonged to me. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our office space in downtown Richmond's Tech District, illuminating the whiteboard covered with expansion plans and the wall of thank you letters from business owners whose operations we'd transformed. Maria Santos from Riverside Roasters had been right when she'd told Harrison that my platform had revolutionized her business, but even I hadn't anticipated how quickly word would spread through the small business community. I was reviewing quarterly reports when my assistant Jake knocked on the door. "Emma, you have a visitor. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important family business." My stomach dropped. I'd been expecting this conversation for months, but I'd hoped it might never come. "Send her in," I said, closing my laptop and preparing myself for whatever version of Natalie was about to walk through my door. The woman who entered looked like my sister, but the perfect composure that had always defined her was gone. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. Instead of her usual elaborate styling, she wore jeans and a sweater that looked like they'd come from a department store rather than a boutique, and her face was free of the carefully applied makeup that had always been her armor. "Hi, Emma," she said quietly, hovering near the doorway like she wasn't sure she was welcome. "Natalie." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Sit, please." She moved slowly, taking in the office space, the awards on the walls, the photos of me speaking at business conferences, the newspaper clipping from when Richmond Business Journal had featured me on their cover as Tech Entrepreneur of the Year. Her expression was unreadable, but I caught something that might have been genuine admiration. "This is incredible," she said, settling into the chair. "I mean, I knew intellectually that you'd started a company, but seeing it—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "I had no idea it would be like this. What can I do for you, Natalie?" She was quiet for a long moment, her hands twisted in her lap. "I came to apologize, and to ask for your help." The combination surprised me. Help with what? With understanding how to rebuild my life. She looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Genuine humility. "Emma, I've lost everything. David, obviously. My job. Turns out that systematically undermining your sister's reputation doesn't reflect well on your character when HR gets involved. Most of my friends, because apparently being publicly dumped at your own engagement party makes you social poison." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. "Are you? Really?" There was no accusation in her voice, just curiosity. "Yes, I never wanted you to lose everything. I just wanted to stop losing myself." Natalie nodded slowly. "That's what I'm starting to understand. That this was never actually about you. It was about me being so afraid of not being enough that I convinced myself your success somehow diminished mine." "What changed? What made you see it differently?" "Therapy," she said simply. "Lots and lots of therapy. Turns out that when your entire identity crumbles in public, you either get help or you completely fall apart. I chose help." I leaned back in my chair, studying her face. The brittle perfection that had always characterized Natalie was gone, replaced by something that looked more real but also more fragile. "What did you learn?" That I've been living my entire life like it was a competition I had to win instead of an experience I got to have. That I was so focused on being better than you that I never figured out who I actually was when I wasn't comparing myself to someone else. She paused, looking out the window at the city below. And I learned that I destroyed the relationship with the one person who might have been my strongest ally if I'd been brave enough to support her instead of sabotage her. Natalie, let me finish, please. I need to say this. She took a shaky breath. I stole 3 years of family relations. I don't expect forgiveness, she continued. I don't even know if I deserve the chance to earn it back. But I wanted you to know that I understand what I did, and I understand why it was unforgivable. It wasn't unforgivable, I said quietly. It was incredibly hurtful and damaging, but it wasn't unforgivable. She looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. Does that mean? It means I'm willing to see if we can build something new. Not the relationship we had before, that was toxic for both of us, but maybe something healthier. How would that work? I thought about it. Honestly, I don't know. We'd have to figure it out as we go. But it would start with complete honesty about who we actually are, not who we think we should be. I don't even know who I actually am anymore, Natalie admitted. For 30 years, I've defined myself in relation to other people, smarter than some, prettier than others, more successful than you. When that framework collapsed, I realized I didn't have any idea what I actually liked, what I actually wanted, what I was actually good at. So what are you doing about it? Starting over, I moved back in with Mom and Dad temporarily, which has been its own kind of education in family dynamics. I'm working part-time at a nonprofit that helps small businesses with marketing, which is humbling but also kind of wonderful. And I'm in therapy twice a week, trying to figure out how to be a person instead of a performance. The transformation was so complete that I almost didn't recognize the sister I'd grown up with. This version of Natalie was uncertain, searching, real, in a way that the polished socialite had never been. The help you mentioned, I said. What kind of help? I want to understand how you did it. How you built something meaningful while dealing with a family that was actively undermining you. How you stayed focused on your goals when everyone around you was telling you that you weren't good enough. You think I'm some kind of role model now? I think you're someone who figured out how to be authentic in a world that rewards performance. And I think I need to learn that skill if I'm ever going to have a life worth living. I was quiet for a moment, processing this request. 6 months ago, Natalie had been actively sabotaging my relationships and celebrating my isolation. Now she was asking me to mentor her through rebuilding her life. I can't teach you how to be authentic, I said finally. That's something you have to figure out for yourself. But I can tell you how I survived the process. How? By deciding that other people's opinions of me were less important than my own opinion of myself. By building something that mattered to me, regardless of whether anyone else understood or valued it. And by accepting that some relationships aren't worth preserving if they require you to be smaller than you are. Natalie was listening intently, like she was taking mental notes. But the most important thing, I continued, was learning that my worth wasn't determined by comparison to other people. Your success doesn't diminish mine, and my success doesn't diminish yours. There's enough room in the world for both of us to be extraordinary. Do you really believe that? I'm learning to. It's still hard sometimes, especially when I'm around family. But yes, I'm learning to believe that we don't have to compete for value. Natalie was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. Emma, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but would you be willing to see me sometimes? Maybe have coffee occasionally. Let me update you on how the therapy is going, how the rebuilding process is working. Like a relationship audit? Like sister check-ins? If that's something you'd be open to. I looked at this woman who, I think, I said finally, I'd like that. But with conditions. Of course. Complete honesty. No managing information. No protecting anyone's feelings with strategic omissions. If we're going to rebuild any kind of relationship, it has to be based on truth. Agreed. And professional boundaries. This is my workplace, my business, my professional identity. It's not a topic for family therapy or a place for working through sibling dynamics. Understood. And if you backslide, if you start falling into old patterns of competition or manipulation, I reserve the right to end the experiment. Fair enough. She stood up, looking around the office one more time. Emma, I really am proud of you. Not in a competitive way, not in a way that makes it about me. Just proud. You built something beautiful here. Thank you, I said, and for the first time in my adult life, I believed that my sister's praise was genuine. After she left, I sat in my office thinking about second chances and the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. I wasn't sure if Natalie and I would ever have a healthy relationship, but I was willing to find out. Because the woman who had walked into my office today wasn't the same person who had destroyed my engagement party 6 months ago. And I wasn't the same person either. 2 years after the engagement party that shattered my family's carefully constructed facade, I stood at the podium of the Richmond Convention Center, looking out at an audience of 800 small business owners who had gathered for the first annual Castellano Logistics Small Business Innovation Summit. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now comfortable speaking to hundreds of strangers when I'd once hidden my success to avoid conversations with my own family. 3 years ago, I said into the microphone, my voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium, I was a freelance consultant working 18-hour days in a studio apartment, convinced that success meant staying invisible. Today, Castellano Logistics serves over 1,500 small businesses across 12 states, and our platform has helped create an estimated 3,400 new jobs in underserved communities. The applause was warm and genuine, coming from people whose lives had been tangibly improved by the work my team and I had built together. In the front row, I could see Maria Santos from Riverside Roasters, now running a coffee empire with 6 locations, all optimized by our logistics platform. Next to her sat Marcus Chen, whose delivery service had grown from a single van to a fleet of 20 vehicles serving the entire Richmond metro area. But this summit isn't really about technology, I continued. It's about the courage to build something meaningful, even when the people around you don't understand your vision. It's about refusing to let other people's limitations define your possibilities. In the third row, I spotted my parents, beaming with a pride that had taken them 2 years to learn how to express without apologizing for their previous blindness. My father had become something of an evangelist for my company, telling anyone who would listen about his daughter, the tech entrepreneur, though I suspected he still didn't fully understand what I actually did for a living. The theme of this year's summit is Building Authentic Success, I said, clicking to the next slide in my presentation. And I want to share something personal about what that phrase means to me. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Entrepreneurs, small business owners, dreamers who were building something from nothing, just as I had. Authentic success isn't just about financial metrics or market share. It's about building something that reflects who you actually are, not who you think you should be. It's about creating value that extends beyond your own life and having the courage to be visible in your competence. The words felt true in a way that my old life of careful invisibility never had. These past 2 years had taught me that hiding my capabilities hadn't protected me from anything. It had just prevented me from connecting with the people. Miss Castellano, she said, I wanted to thank you personally. 2 years ago, I was working 80-hour weeks and barely breaking even. Now I have time to actually design new pieces, and my profit margins have increased by 40%. That's your success, I told her. The platform just gave you better information to work with. You did the hard work of building something beautiful. As I moved through the reception, I spotted a familiar figure near the registration table. Natalie was manning the volunteer check-in station, wearing a simple black dress and a name tag that read, Event Support Staff. Our monthly coffee meetings over the past 18 months had evolved into something I hadn't expected. a genuine friendship built on mutual respect rather than family obligation. The transformation in my sister had been remarkable to witness. After losing her marketing job, she'd spent 6 months in intensive therapy before taking a position with a nonprofit that provided business consulting to women entrepreneurs. The work paid a fraction of her previous salary, but it had given her something she'd never had before: a sense of purpose that didn't depend on comparison to others. "How's it going?" I asked, approaching her station. "Better than expected," she said with a smile that had become genuinely warm over the past 2 years. "I've registered about 50 people this morning, and at least half of them have told me stories about how your platform saved their businesses." "Our platform," I corrected. "You've been part of the user experience design for the past year." It was true. Natalie's marketing background had proven invaluable when we'd started developing more intuitive interfaces for business owners who weren't naturally tech-savvy. Her ability to translate complex concepts into accessible language had become one of our company's most valuable assets. "I still can't believe you hired me," she said, processing another registration. "I hired you because you're good at what you do, and because you've learned how to collaborate instead of compete." The honesty that had become the foundation of our rebuilt relationship still felt fragile sometimes, but it was real in a way our previous dynamic had never been. "Emma," she said quietly, "there's something I need to tell you." "What's that?" "David called me yesterday." I felt a brief flutter of concern. David had moved to Seattle after the engagement disaster, taking a position with a tech startup and apparently rebuilding his own life. We'd exchanged a few professional emails over the years, but I'd assumed that chapter was permanently closed. What did he want? To apologize, actually. He said he'd been following the company's success and realized he'd never properly acknowledged the role he played in enabling my behavior toward you. That's thoughtful of him. He also said he was proud of both of us for figuring out how to be sisters instead of competitors. The phrase struck me as exactly right. We weren't the same people who had grown up defining ourselves in opposition to each other. We were two adults who had learned how to support each other's success without feeling diminished by it. "I want to, but it would mean relocating to Atlanta. I'd be overseeing programs in 5 states, helping coordinate resources for entrepreneurs in underserved communities." "Sounds like exactly the kind of work you were meant to do." "I think so too. But I wanted to make sure you knew that leaving Richmond doesn't mean I'm running away from the family work we've been doing." "Natalie, you don't need my permission to take a job that's perfect for you. That's the whole point of what we've learned. Your success isn't a threat to mine." She smiled, and I could see the lingering amazement in her eyes that this was actually true. The reception was winding down when Harrison approached me, holding 2 glasses of champagne and wearing the satisfied expression of someone whose investment had paid off beyond expectations. "Congratulations," he said, handing me a glass. "This summit exceeded every metric we'd projected. The feedback from attendees has been extraordinary. Thank you for believing in the vision when it was still just a prototype. Thank you for proving that sometimes the best business decisions are the ones that feel more like social justice than profit maximization." It was true. Castellano Logistics had become profitable beyond our wildest projections. But more importantly, it had become a force for economic democratization, giving small businesses access to the same technological advantages that had previously been available only to major corporations. As the convention center emptied and my team began packing up the displays, I found myself standing alone in the auditorium, looking at the empty chairs where 800 entrepreneurs had spent the day learning how to build more authentic, sustainable businesses. 3 years ago, I'd been a woman so afraid of taking up space that I'd hidden my success from my own family. Now I was someone who used her visibility to create opportunities for others to be visible in their own competence. The journey from secret freelancer to public entrepreneur hadn't been easy, but it had been worth every moment of discomfort. Every difficult conversation, every relationship that had to be rebuilt from scratch. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Watch the live stream of your keynote." Dad cried during the standing ovation. "We love you and we're so proud of who you've become." I smiled, typing back, "I'm proud of who we've all become." Because that was the real transformation, not just my own evolution from hidden to visible, but my family's journey from dysfunction to authenticity, from competition to collaboration, from secrets to truth. As I walked out of the convention center into the Richmond evening, I realized the woman who had sat at that engagement party 2 years ago, absorbing her sister's public humiliation while hiding her own extraordinary success, was gone completely. In her place was someone I was still getting to know. Emma Castellano, entrepreneur, sister, daughter, and creator of spaces where other people could discover their own courage to be exactly who they were meant to be. The transformation was complete, but the story was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.